who gained her BS at the University of Michigan in interdisciplinary engineering with a minor in race, gender, and ethnicity. Zakiyah began her work with the Pedagogy of Action in 2006 and has traveled with the program first as a participant and then program assistant to South Africa and Jamaica for the last 9 years. She was the program coordinator for the Eco Girls program in the Department of Afro-American and African Studies. Currently, she is a research fellow with the Center for AIDS Research in South Africa, or CAPRISA, at the Vulindlela Clinical Research Site, where she works with the Wellness and Adolescent Program, serving as a program coordinator for the Youth Leaders Program, YLP. Next we have Raina LaGrand, who traveled to South Africa with POA in 2011 and 2012 as an undergraduate student. After graduating, Raina completed a yoga teacher training and lived in La La Land for a year and a half. Raina is currently pursuing master's degrees in the School of Public Health and the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan. When she can escape schoolwork and endless incoming emails, she enjoys shopping for lipstick, cooking for her loved ones, and dreaming about all the Nando's, Peartizer, and Reason ice cream bars she could be consuming if only she lived in South Africa. And last but not least, we have Lyndsay McCarver, who is a recent graduate of the University of Michigan. She received a BA in Women's Studies and focused her coursework on gender and health disparities. In fall 2013, she was introduced to the module in Dr. Hanif's class and presented it to the Horizons Network in Detroit, Michigan. In September, she will be spending a year in Sydney, Australia, working and traveling to give her tools to be a positive change through empowering people to make decisions leading to greater health for themselves and their families. So we can welcome everyone on again.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yes, hello. Yes, so I'm Zakiyah, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the work that I'm doing in Vulindlela. First, just to give you sort of some background, for those who don't know, the Center for the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa, CAPRISA, is an institution and organization that's housed at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and is really at the forefront of creating new solutions to HIV, whether that be trying to find a vaccine, also trying to work on the front lines of developing microbicides, which is something that Nisha introduced to me, which is a gel that one could use to prevent themselves from getting HIV or from getting pregnant. Engineer struggling. This one? Okay, so just to give you some context, the prevalence of HIV in South Africa is 12.2%, but for adolescents aged 15 to 24, that's 7.1%. In KwaZulu-Natal, the province that has the highest rates of infection in the country, the prevalence is 16.9%, and for adolescents, that's 12%. Which mirrors that of the national prevalence, you can see. And then where I'm located, Vulindlela is in a district called Umgungundlovu, and the prevalence is 45.7%. So Umgungundlovu is the district with the highest rates of infection in the entire country. So they did a study with 14 schools in the area, and they found, the disparity between numbers, between males and females. These are high school age kids. So you can see HIV prevalence for females is 4.5 times higher than it is for males. And for HSV2, it's 4 times as high. So this is a target group that we really want to focus on in addressing HIV. So what we decided to do is create a program where, I've been to HIV conferences and we talk about who we should look at, target groups, let's have discussions about it. But we felt that the young people themselves that are most at risk aren't at those conferences, they aren't in the conversation. So we tried to come up with a way to engage young people so that they can be telling us what the solution to solving HIV should be. So the purpose was to develop a program for young people in Vulindlela who are most at risk of HIV infection to empower themselves and each other to address HIV, the HIV epidemic, as well as behavioral and structural factors that affect their risk for HIV. You don't need this. So we started with 20 girls, and we wanted to create a very diverse group. So I think in schools, if you look at who would be the leader, it would be the girls that have high grades. It would be the girls who are the good girls. And we wanted to shape that idea of what leadership is, shape that up. So we looked for girls who already have children, girls who have HIV, those who are on treatment, those who are in school, and those who are out of school, who didn't finish school. We wanted all of them to be a part of the conversation. And we also wanted to make sure we included girls who identify as lesbian in this community as well. So this pilot began in July 2014, and it's based on Freudian principles. So just to talk more, I just wanted to give you all a background of why we're working with this particular population because of their high risk. So we did the module with our out of school girls, just for logistic purposes. It was easier since they were out of school to work with them. It was a small group, and we did it in English and in Zulu. The community I am in is predominantly Zulu speaking. And one of the things that stuck out was just, since the module breaks things down so simply, the things that people understood that they had never understood before. So Caprisa has been in this area for I don't know how many years, maybe even 10. So there's constant information coming at this community about HIV all the time, all the time, all the time. And one of the participants said, this thing with the rubbing and the condom and how it works, like I didn't know. Like I didn't realize like that's how a condom works. Or I didn't realize that the little tiny cuts, that's how you get HIV when you have sex. And I remember having that same epiphany myself when I learned the module, like, like, you know, because people just tell you get it through sex, don't have sex. So it never occurs to you how. I only understood that once I learned the module. And so I think that's really significant for a population that is so high risk, not to understand how. So when we do the module and we talk about condom use, okay, everybody rub your hands together. We're just gonna turn this discussion. Rub them faster, rub them slower, rub them faster. Okay, so this is what we use to describe what's happening when you're having sex, right? No matter if it's hard rubbing, fast rubbing, slow rubbing, there's rubbing, and there's little tiny cuts that are caused from that rubbing. And the fluids from one person's body can go into the other person's body through those little tiny cuts. That's how you can get HIV through sex. That's what they don't tell you, they just say don't have sex. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about using a condom, we say, okay, yeah, you know that rubbing we talked about earlier, well when you use a condom, there's something there. And those cuts and tears are still there, and that fluid is still there, but the fluid from one person's body can't go into my body because of that thing. And so to be basically the most at-risk population in the entire country and not know how a condom can protect you from getting HIV, I mean, that's significant. And I think it speaks to the power of the module. But then the other thing is this thing about being faithful. So, Candace, tell me one goal you have.
Let's see.
Anything?
To get through my math class this semester, this coming semester.
Okay. To get, what's that, calculus?
Yeah.
Okay. So Candace's goal is to get through calculus this semester. What do you have to do to get through calculus?
I'm gonna have to study. I've heard about the group projects that you have to do.
Okay, so she's preparing herself. So Candace has this goal, and then Candace has to look at the things she needs to do to achieve this goal. Right, so when we talk about faithful, that might be an example that we use with our audience to talk about the goals that they have, to talk about how they can achieve those goals, but then to also talk about the things that can get in their way from achieving those goals. So if Candace has a bunch of friends who want to go out partying when she wants to study for her math class, maybe she shouldn't hang out with those friends. But also faithful, Nisha mentions, is sort of the most feminist aspect of the module, because it actually asks women to be faithful to themselves and not be faithful to one partner, which is something you always hear repeatedly when you're talking about HIV and sexual education. And we're socialized not to think about ourselves. So that's something that's really hard for women to think about. It's really hard for young girls to think about. I mean, they have responsibilities. They have siblings to take care of. They have to cook for their families. So this idea that I should think about myself is something that can be revolutionary for people who just came to learn about HIV. And so that also affects the partners that they pick. And I think this is something that is particularly important when working with females between the ages of 12 and 24, right? So they're the most at-risk population, but part of it is because of the choices that we make as young people. And so I'm still trying to figure out what that means, and how do we have that discussion with young girls so we can talk about it, but what does it mean for them to truly own it and truly believe it, and truly have an effect on their decisions. So I think I'm out of time, but thank you for your time.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Raina LaGrand, as was said, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my perspective on peer education programs. And in true POA fashion, I hand-wrote my paper last night. I typed it first, copied it over, thought it would take me 10 minutes, took me an hour and 20. So my hand is very, very sore this morning, but that's okay. So I've always had a really deep appreciation and a strong conviction in peer education programs because they've really impacted me both as a learner as well as a teacher. In high school, I volunteered with a sexual health peer education program at Planned Parenthood, and because of the relationships I built with my peers, as well as my mentors there and the experiences I had teaching and learning with those folks, I applied to and then attended the University of Michigan. If it weren't for that program, I'm not sure that I would have developed the confidence or the drive to go to U of M or to move away from home, which is a whole hour and 15 minutes from my parents in Battle Creek, Michigan. So anyhow, once I was at U of M, I volunteered for a sexual violence and interpersonal violence organization, and I also facilitated peer workshops there. Through a relationship I developed there with Lily, for some of you know Lily, I learned about POA, so I drafted this long email to Professor Hanneth and got back a like 3-word reply about coming to her office. I have no idea where it was at, can't find it anywhere. And so I finally tracked her down. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience with peer education programs broadly, but also more specifically with POA, because this is really what has influenced me the most personally and professionally. So what is clear to me that is that in the field of public health, peer education programs are highly valued. In fact, I think they're borderline like trendy, but they're not adequately explained. And as we talked about in our class this semester, in one of our primary texts, Catherine Campbell asserts that peer education is a model without a theory. For those who would like a little more definition, I see peer education models as training non-expert individuals to be the primary information sharers. So traditionally, the teachers and learners are of the same or similar age, but I want to be clear that for me, peer educators are not always defined by an age group. I saw a UNICEF definition that explained that peer education is based on the reality that many people make changes not only based on what they know, but on the opinions and actions of their close, trusted peers. So for me, this idea is more reminiscent of a sense of trust built among the community, which is more clearly broadly defined than age, I think, especially in less westernized spaces. So as just a brief overview of what else I'll talk about today, I'll first explore how our societal relationship, how our society interacts with information, what this might mean ethically or morally, in a sense, how it relates to peer interpersonal relationships and peer education broadly, and then I'm going to finish with what this means for POA and the module more specifically. So in general, I think, but especially in the West, we're oversaturated with information. So not only do we have books and newspapers, but we have TV and the internet and social media, and we're consumed by it. And it's happened so quickly and inadvertently that I don't think a lot of us, maybe those of us here a little bit more so, realize how reliant we are on those sources of information. And as we increase these sources of information, our expectation and our desire for information increases, as well as our expectation of ourselves and others to obtain it and process it, which I find counterproductive because I don't think it actually allows us to truly process and contextualize and internalize the information and all the details. So I think this is a relatively new norm, and it's intertwined as well with our obsession to complete and finish and accomplish things. We're uncomfortable with simply being and experiencing. We're more obsessed with the goal, the end goal, than concerned with the process. So I'm a yoga instructor, and I practice yoga daily, though that's been a challenge on this trip. And since completing my yoga teacher training and studying yogic texts, I've come to see everything as a yoga practice. For me, life is a big yoga mat, which some of you know is quite literal, but beyond that as well. So I almost wanted to title this presentation, or subtitle it, "The Means Not the End," and I chose to focus on "Is Knowledge Power?" because I thought it more thoroughly captures the strengths and the limitations of the module. So our fixation with immediate satisfaction is unjustifiably associated with the need for the immediate and visible outcomes, which may or may not actually validate the process and its effectiveness. I think this is very individualistic and dangerous to the sustainability of health information transference and then the subsequent self-empowerment that follows. To share a yoga example, like when I get up every morning and I practice, I'm not, my end goal is not to jump into a handstand, though that is fun, right? But it's more so about developing a deeper understanding of my body and what I need in that particular day. And so Freire speaks of what's called the banking model of education, which Lyndsay will talk about a little bit more, but essentially refers to how education can merely become depositing information without reciprocity. And he writes that, in the banking concept of education, knowledge is a gift bestowed by those who consider themselves knowledgeable by those whom they consider to know nothing. And there's a lot more I could say about Freire. I'll just leave it at that. I also want to again highlight the trust quote that is on the t-shirts this year and in the program, and which I'm sure will be repeated throughout the day. But what I hope to cultivate in my work as a health educator and as a yoga instructor, and what the POA has taught me in the module, is that we need a more thoughtful and authentic understanding of trusting the people and the process and letting go of expectation. Expectation gets us in trouble, which I think many of us understand as a life lesson. So my constant intention is to rather be in balance, to not be stuck in the idea that my thoughts or the way I see things are the way they are, they're the absolute, or that they're the absolute truth. We have to let go of our expected outcomes and that sense of attachment, and also not be averted to working for what we want and need at the same time. So continually balancing those things. A professor shared something with me in my class that I appreciated about how in the past professors used to walk with their students and allow more space and kind of eliminate boxed-in thinking by being outdoors instead of like a traditional classroom. And I think that that really allowed space for difference in thought and growth and innovation and ideas. In Long Walk to Freedom, Nelson Mandela describes the decision-making process in African communities, such as the one he was from, where everyone would speak and share until a consensus was come to. And this process, compared to the West, also illuminated balance in a different way by acknowledging the importance of individual perspectives and simultaneously establishing commonality and harmony. In a way, POA is a really long walk. And it's a walk that never finishes, right? So we're all continually learning and developing in our consciousness and our ideas and where we want to go. And I think what's especially awesome is that we all have slightly different experiences and takeaways, And I think we'll see that throughout the day, that our experiences and what we think will complement one another. And so we're forced in POA to get out of our boxes, out of our comfort zones, away from our expectation, and to challenge what has already been done and created and finished. And this is partly why the module is so simplistic. And so I think once we acknowledge and respect the POA process, we can focus on relationships and community building. And the individualism we suffer from, especially as American students, does not respect the very real differences in experience and thought that we all have. So commonality is truly built by acknowledging how we are different. Nelson Mandela said our experiences are our strengths, and as a species, or excuse me, our differences are our strengths as a species and as a world community. And I also wanted to share another quote by him in which he said, as I looked back on those days, his days growing up, I am inclined to believe that the type of life I led at home, my experiences in the Veld where we worked and played together in groups, introduced me at an early age to the ideas of collective effort. So in POA, we experience collective effort by not only in the ways we teach, but in having to go out and dance when half of us are really tired, cooking together, and singing and dancing with each other and those that we teach. So relationship building through the POA process and the module process also highlights the importance of reciprocity in how we share and sing and dance with one another. And in doing so, we cultivate a more genuine desire to share information with the learners of each generation, rather than banking knowledge and therefore setting dehumanizing expectation. So there is a process for both learners and teachers, and I see it, like I said earlier with the yoga practice, as a practice. And therefore the true outcome is not our expectations or fulfilled sense of satisfaction, but is the gift of personal growth and empowerment for both parties. And this happens on both an individual and community level, I think. I just have one more paragraph I think I'd like to share. I think that it's not solely the accomplishment of understanding the module or the information that is crucial, though it is important, and I reiterate my earlier point that balance matters, but I see it more so about the process for me. To see others teaching, to believe that you can also teach, to contextualize what the module uniquely means for you and your community, its strengths and its limitations. And what I find even more beautiful about the module in POA is that we all get to experience the process of first being a learner and then being a teacher. And so this is what the module has meant to me, and how POA has informed my existence in the world and as a conscious professional. To let go a bit, to trust the module, to trust the process and the people, enjoying the practice, learning about ourselves and others along the way, and then standing in solidarity and singing and dancing when we all realize that the gifts that we receive are far greater than we could have expected. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
As Marion mentioned, my name is Lyndsay, and I was first introduced to the module in 2013 in Dr. Hannah's class, the pedagogy of empowerment, which is kind of a prereq to going on these trips. And even though Anisha teaches in Ann Arbor, which is just less than an hour outside of Detroit, I think 2013 was the first year that we brought the module to Detroit and in different areas in the local community. So it's actually been in South Africa far longer than it's been in Detroit. However, it gave us a really unique experience as students. And that semester, myself and a few other students went to the Horizons Project, which is a nonprofit organization in Detroit that provides services to HIV positive and at-risk youth. And Irvin Hollins is a really special person to the module. And at the Horizons Project, he's a clinical systems navigator, and he was initially surprised when he was expected to learn the module as well, because he thought it was just for his patients. But despite his reservations, he learned it, he fell in love with it, as people do, and then he returned to the university the following year to teach students, and many of the students in this room were actually students of Urban. And this would not have been possible with a banking style of education, which treats the learners simply as empty vessels to be filled. Instead, the module is empowering because it relies on sharing leadership so that we can create the next generation of teachers who can own the information, make it their own, and I think this is especially relevant in this context. The University of Michigan always calls its students and faculty the leaders and best. However, we really want to step away from that and have the students pass on skills and knowledge so that we can create a better sense of empowerment so that better things can happen with the module. So I think that many people are drawn to the module because of all of the collaboration between people. You know, in small groups, we come up with jokes, we discuss what we think is really important to people in that context. You know, people come up with their own way of explaining things, new examples, things like that. And I think it really makes people feel cared for, important, loved, and included in the whole process. So this discussion and sharing of information was where I was drawing to Nisha's class, and it stood in stark opposition to some of the other science courses, the biology courses, where I sat next to silent students. We watched a PowerPoint, we memorized every word, every diagram, whatever, just so that we could spit back out on an exam in a couple of weeks. This is also similar to the ABC method of HIV education, where students are simply told to abstain, to be faithful to one partner, and to use a condom. So both of these methods, both in those science courses and the ABC method, are examples of banking education, where students receive, memorize, and just repeat that information. Again, the students accept the deposits of information from the teachers, who are the only exclusive holders of knowledge. This method really inhibits creative thinking, and it creates spectators, not recreators of information, as Barry says. So going along with this approach to learning would be transactional leadership, which focuses on the exchanges that occur between leaders and their followers, just in this type of system. So in this kind, U of M students would deposit their information without collaborating with the community, and without allowing the new learners to take hold of that information. In a traditional setting, this might be the case, causing further oppression. Fortunately, that's not what happens with the module. So transactional leadership is usually talked about in opposition to transformational leadership. And this is a process of engaging with others to create a connection that can increase motivation and morality in both the leader and the follower, to serve a greater purpose that's beyond self-interest. So as opposed to leaders who use banking education, transformational leaders stimulate students' intellect and creativity, leading to more innovation. The leaders in this context must take into account the context and the reality that their learners exist in, helping them to grow. And Berger would say that they collaborate together in the process of mutual humanization, which empowers both parties. So teachers of the module from the university setting can also embody servant leadership, and this puts its emphasis on putting others first. You don't use slogans just to transform people into masses which can be controlled, but by collaborating in the interest of mutual liberation, servant leaders and students at the university must humble themselves and ensure that those being served become healthier, wiser, freer, and more autonomous. And the least privileged in society must benefit. So U of M students can embody characteristics of servant leaders by being aware of their impact on others, listening, and having empathy to those people that they're working with. And so once the teachers give up leadership for the sake of leadership, and focus on enabling the students to recreate knowledge, both parties become, both teachers and learning, kind of sharing that experience and standing together in solidarity. So one really practical example from my experience with the module of Detroit is the fact that, when their reality was that they didn't have rides to the graduation, we made sure that we didn't stop by just teaching them in Detroit, but we went to pick them up, we went to bring them into the university. Irvin really found this profound because he always describes his experience with the U of M students as a really great way to blend the different individuals from really different backgrounds. They come together for really educational and inspirational collaboration together. So in response, learners from communities like Irvin are able to experience a shift in leadership, which really challenges the idea that the university is the holder of information. The module is able to mobilize people who develop an authentic leadership for themselves, and they can distribute it into their own communities. So Irvin defines leadership for himself as a process of positive direction or influence, and he believes that by identifying with others and learning about the negative things, you can lead them to a brighter and more positive outlook. And so these leaders, like Irvin, who are new to the University of Michigan community, are established leaders in their own community, like within the Horizons Project. And this is really important to bring them back to the university and, again, challenge that idea that only students at the University of Michigan can be the holders of knowledge. But he comes back, and I hope that maybe some of his students can speak to that a little bit more. And so according to Ferry, the co-creational process of teaching and learning leads to humans in the process of liberation. And the shift in leadership he experienced from learner to teacher was really the pivotal point for him in appreciating the sharing of knowledge and leadership. And the Horizons Project was important for Irvin in addressing HIV stigma, which exists in his own life and community. So by owning the information of the module and engaging in the search for empowerment alongside communities in Detroit and the University of Michigan, he became an essential component in that fight for liberation. And he's a great leader and a great example for anyone involved with POA.
Thanks again to all the panelists. I want to open it up for questions from the audience for any of the panelists. Brown?
I'd like to pose this question to Zakiyah. You talk about faithfulness as an empowerment prevention strategy. Can you share some examples of how you see that playing out in these young people's lives?
So I think excuse me, let me get my thoughts together. The idea was, okay, let's mobilize around HIV, but in the meantime, help to develop the skills that they already have and to add to their skill set so that these 20 young people could be pushing the next sort of initiatives or organizations in the community itself. So I think that's how I see that on a community level. But then also, in building skills, we have discussions about personal behavior, about goal setting, about, what it means to have a strong sense of cultural values, but also trying to think about that and question that and think about how those cultural values sometimes put you in a place to be the most at risk for HIV infection as a female, as a young female.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Zakiyah, to what extent do you deal with power relations between men and women and cultural values around masculinity and not using condoms? And also, for example, rape cases. So to what extent, it's all very well empowering women, and I mean, it's absolutely kind of has to go hand in hand, but to what extent is there any program that that works with men and transforming cultural values?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there is much work to be done with youth in general across the board. For us, because this demographic is most at risk, and because oftentimes programs in science don't focus on young people, that's something that's very important to the organization I work for. So we started this pilot with young people. But it's something that we are keeping in mind because we know that young men need to be engaged. So I would love to see a YLP with young boys, where, you know, someone like myself and my colleague, two young men engage young boys in the same way, and then bringing both of those groups together to talk about those dynamics. But it's something that hasn't happened yet.
Just to follow up, there are some programs that are in place, like some gender justice, for instance, which particularly focuses on men and boys and issues of patriarchy and gender inequality, and the ways in which men and boys need to be either educated, trained, reformed about these issues of equality and gender equality and the like. There are a number of programs. Unfortunately, they're not enough, but I also, with regard to targeting men and boys, but I also think there's not enough going on with regard to girls and women. But it definitely can't be either or. And unfortunately, we also get this way in which programs and funding gets pitted. So a group of women get together and say, women need to be empowered, we need funding for women, we need to be women-led, this needs to be women-focused, and complaints about groups that are either led by men or focused on men and women and boys and girls, but the funding goes to a group that's led by a man. You get into all sorts of battles and debates and fiefdom fights around these issues, which really are unnecessary and unproductive, when indeed what we need is to look at boys and girls and how they're socialized and how they're brought up, and then what's going on with men and women in this society, and particularly around the cultural issues and the patriarchy and the like, and challenge it all from a number of different fronts with a number of different leaders, with a number of different peer learning groups, and the ways in which they need to cross-fertilize one another. Like I said earlier, some of that is going on, not enough. But there are some very good programs like some for gender justice.
That's all.
So when we talk about the faithfulness, and you know, when we do epidemiological studies, we look at trends and, you know, relationships. And one of the big things, especially amongst the youth, is multiple concurrent partnerships. And again, how we approach it, and in terms of, you know, HIV prevention, we look at it as we demonize that whole thing. And again, it boils down to their faithfulness. Instead of us, you know, opening up and understand, perhaps, you know, our definition of relationships has evolved. And what it used to be is not the same. And that has been exactly the criticism for the ABC approach, as that it has been designed based on Christian philosophies and values, and perhaps that in an African context or elsewhere in the world, that is not how we define a relationship, you know. And perhaps we should, again, that banking, that Freire says, how we, you know, educate our people, our young people. We need to challenge ourselves in terms of how we define a relationship, and perhaps our information will then be, you know, designed differently. Instead of saying that if you have more than one sexual partner, that is wrong and that increases your risk. Yes, that is perhaps correct. The more sexual partners you have does increase your risk of contracting HIV, but that's not the issue. You know, I'll leave it at that.
Lyndsay, I know you come from gender studies and women's studies background, but also kind of a little bit of, you know, of the science and the health aspect of it. Could you kind of talk about your struggle about like de-learning, you know, unlearning all of that, and once you came to the module, because I know that happens a lot, particularly people coming from like a science or public health background.
Yeah, actually, I kind of entered Nisha's class as a pre-med student, and so I had learned about HIV, I knew about the virus, probably forgot a lot of it by now, but you know, in her course that was really relevant to me, and then I think in her course, for me, a lot of the process was thinking, well, if we know so much about HIV, if we have, you know, medication that can treat it, if we, you know so much about this, why is it not getting to people? You know, like why is there still such a problem? And so that kind of reframed my thinking about it. And I started to see that maybe talking about T cells, talking about opportunistic infections, maybe that's not the right way to talk to people about keeping themselves healthy and empowering them to talk to their own communities about how to keep themselves healthy. So I think that was really relevant to me. Does that answer your question?
So I think we're running low on time.
Let's have the question.
Yeah, we can have a question.
Okay.
Can you pass around the mic for questions, please?
Okay, so Sammy.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So Raina, I know you touched on this a little bit, but I was hoping to speak more to it. You talked about being a yoga instructor and working with youth, and then you did the whole module. Were there aspects of yoga that you used in the module, and in the module that you used in like peer education?
Yeah. They both interact for me, and it's taken me some time to figure out how they interact. Because when I first completed my teacher training, why I say I lived in La La Land is because I've talked with some of you about how cultural appropriation plays into yoga in the West, and so a lot of the yoga instructors I know don't think critically about what they teach and if or how it's more than a physical practice and things like that. So I think yoga informs, well, I'll say how POA informs my yoga instruction first, in that I really attempt to build community. I don't want to go in and feel like I'm just guiding people through this hour and 15 long practice and then leaving. So I have really stepped outside of studio spaces and rented my own space to teach young adults and some older adults, and rather than expecting them to come to me at a studio where they don't get a chance to know me, and then they pay me $500 for 10 minutes, and then you know they leave, and then they don't really know what they're doing. So I really want people to feel confident in their bodies and confident in their movement, because one of the largest frustrations for me as a yoga instructor is when people say, A, I can't do yoga because I'm not flexible or strong, or B, I could never do this by myself. So I really want to work with them to help them feel a higher sense of self-efficacy and taking this physical yoga practice with them, and other aspects that maybe aren't physical, so that they can explore more, and then it can be more of a conversation. So I host conversations with folks. I practice with them instead of always teaching. And then how yoga informs my module instruction and my experience in POA, I think has to do more, I think it's actually already exists in POA, in faithfulness, love, understanding, caring, and kindness. And I think that the elements of luck don't always exist in other health or academic spaces, but they are inherent to POA, and they're definitely inherent in yoga and yoga texts, as far as being compassionate for ourselves and others, and expressing empathy, while also balancing like an expectation that you do need to be safe in your body and in your understanding of yoga text and information history.
Alice had a question.
Thanks. Zakiyah and Leslie. I'm particularly interested in issues of economic advantage, economic disadvantage, and what it means for young people, particularly young women. So, for instance, here in South Africa, there were just some statistics that came out talking about HIV amongst young women in terms of the transmission of the disease. And in many instances, and I forget the statistic, but it was rather high, the transmission comes from having intergenerational sex, intergenerational relationships, transactional sex, based on access to material items, be it a cell phone, be it money, be it clothing, be it weaves. I mean, it's amazing, you know, that being able to buy hair.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Seriously. So I'm wondering what happens in this program around these issues, because we can talk about approaches, we can talk about goals and the like, but what's going on with regard to economic empowerment and discussions and interventions that try to circumvent this transactional issue? And I suspect that similar things happen in places like Detroit and Newark, New Jersey, and places like that. And I just wonder if there's what's going on and what kind of discussions are happening with regard to those issues and those types of issues, in particular in the context of HIV/AIDS and the transmission of AIDS.
That's how you do that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that's definitely the reality of the young women that I work with. And so for us, part of that skills development is to attack or approach the issues that you're talking about. So it's one thing to me every Saturday to talk about using a condom, but like if you don't know how to make a CV, or you haven't thought about what you're gonna do after this, or you're struggling to pass matric, you're gonna have to face all of these issues that you mentioned. And those things do make you more at risk for HIV. So I think what we've done so far at the very beginning of it is just building the skills so that you do have more economic mobility, or more and also changing the question that you ask about yourself and the way that you see yourself, right? So maybe I'm from here and I've never thought about trying to apply to a school that is outside of where my family lives, partially because of the responsibilities as a young woman, but also that just seems like too far from me. So challenging that and having us rethink about the way we think about ourselves, I think will begin to speak to that. There was a program that did more sort of economic empowerment, but that wasn't done with Caprisa doing projects for women. I don't think it was just young women, to do programs around economic empowerment. So I'm trying to figure out if I have answered your question. It is something that we think about, and we're starting with the skills development part. But the hope is that eventually these young women will be starting their own businesses because of some of the skills development they got in this program. That's the hope.
I think it's a bit difficult for me to talk about that, as I am just like a recent graduate from college and I haven't gone on to do my own, my own work, I guess. But how I see it is that, the module kind of has like its philosophy and its way of teaching so that other people can learn it and make it their own. And we're not here for very long. I think that when we come to South Africa and we go to Love Life for 3 days, it's not really in our ability to change those economic conditions right there. But I think the hope is that it sets kind of a model for going off to do further work and making sure that it's never done, just for the people, but it's done with the people and that they can take part of it themselves. Katie?
I can speak to a little bit about that actually. Lyndsay and I were in a course at U of M that did discuss a little bit about the role of women in economic situations that also tie into their health. And I think there are some interesting programs that are going on through the University of Michigan where they send students to help facilitate alternative economic alternative job opportunity for women so that they don't have to be reliant on men for money. Well, I think those, like I said, are a good step. I don't think they have the praxis and the theory behind them. I think they are like, here, do this, you'll make some money, and now you don't have to wait on men. But how that really works in this society, I think, is a bit challenging, because I think as women, we're often told that, you know, we need to take a step back to men, and especially in a lot of countries around the world, women feel as though it's not their place to be ambitious or to go after those sort of job opportunities, and that really does hinder their own health and their own empowerment. I think the module begins with F is for faithful, like Zakiyah was talking about, telling women that it's okay to prioritize their own ambitions, and I think that's a great segue in making women feel empowered and that they can go after job opportunities, and that they don't need to be relying on men for those sort of things. I think that that's something that maybe we can pursue further with the module, and I think that's something that Nisha has been working on is more another like gender-based module. And I think that really telling women that they can step up to the plate, that they can break away from men, while that is very difficult in a lot of contexts, will be super beneficial to reducing the spread of HIV globally.
I just want to ask one question of Lyndsay. Why is I really was proud that you represented Irvin, because Irvin was a black, young, gay man who was HIV positive, which is a huge component of the HIV epidemic in the United States. But Irvin, you represented Irvin, but Irvin is not here. So can you address that? Because we talk about how we're including the community. We get to travel and we get to come to South Africa and work, and Irvin gets to stay in Detroit. So I want you to see if you can address that for a minute.
Well, that is a challenge, because I think that we both talked about how you know, it is difficult, and it would be great if he was here.
I'm sorry, Lyndsay.
Yeah,
I know.
Why would it have been great?
That's my job, so.
Nisha, is this a question that perhaps you can answer?
I think that
How is it a reflection of privilege and who we teach and who we are?
I think that, you know, as a student, I was able to come because I have, you know, I have the economic resources, I have, you know, support from the university that I can apply for more funding for myself to support my travels. And because, though we really do try to work with them as best as possible, you know, maybe some of the administration doesn't recognize him as, you know, truly belonging to the University of Michigan, where he has access to that funding, to those resources to be able to, you know, attend the class, to help out with the class. And I think based on, you know, where he is, he also has the responsibilities at home in Detroit, you know, with his job, with the Horizons Project. And
That's good.
okay.
Well, no, I mean, Irvin, here we go to Detroit and we try to do this sort of radical thing of bringing Irvin to teach you all. And he has taught you all. And, but he cannot come to the trip for a variety of reasons. One is which he's ill. He has a job which he can't extricate himself from. But even so, the concept of traveling, of being HIV positive, of having the economic resources and so forth, makes it difficult. So I want us to sort of, although it's a wonderful thing, I want us to be aware that we should not necessarily romanticize or make bigger or radical efforts to include others, because in the end, we are sort of also making people recipients and not people who are owners at different levels. So I wanted Irvin to be here, and I'm glad that you talked about him. But the reality is that Irvin is a young black HIV positive man in Detroit, and we are from Ann Arbor, and that's the way it is. And I want us to be conscious of that all the time, and to be aware of our constant privilege in every facet of what we do. So I'm sorry, I'm teaching. I didn't.
So
thanks, Lyndsay.
unfortunately, we have to wrap up this session, but there will be time throughout the day to continue this discussion. So we're going to move on to the next panel.
So while we're moving on, if people want to have coffee or something.
I